man. Nice to meet you. I love your book.
Oh, I appreciate that very much.
I mean, this was for me coming from jazz radio. This was like me wandering around the halls of like a candy store with just the sweetest tooth in the world.
Oh man, that's great because I wondered if anybody would even read it when I wrote it. That's
Oh no,
fantastic.
I this this has to be one of the first of its kind. Have you? Did you? I mean,
Uh, there's nothing like it. There's that great book on black radio that William Barlow wrote, and what's that called? It's a great book he wrote. And there's Mark Fisher's Something in the Air, which is a
okay.
love, and there's some things here and there. Well, you can see in my bibliography where
Yeah.
they were. Too many things. Some great deep dives on things like the WDIA in Memphis being the first black station. There's some things, but yeah.
Yeah. So I just, for context for everybody out there in the world, I'm trying to hold the book up. Hopefully my background isn't putting it out, but this is the cover. It's a wonderful book. I have been ecstatic since I've gotten it, and I've been wrapping my head around all of the different. I mean, this is a very dense, wonderful a map of jazz radio from the beginnings to today and everything that's undulated. And it really follows kind of a lot of trends that have happened in this art form that we all love called jazz. And I want to begin our conversation with, first and foremost, what gave you the idea to embark on such, I mean, this had to take a long time with as much research that's in it. What made you want to do this?
Yeah, well, in my past, I was kind of all of those things. I trained as an electrical engineer in college, and I worked as one for many, many years. When I was in high school, I got associated with a radio station uh, run by Seventh-day Adventists of all people, and in the very early days of NPR affiliations, and of course I'm a jazz musician as well. And then when I went to college, I did some college radio. So I really love the broadcasting and radio in particular. Uh, so it was always of interest to me. And somewhere around 2006, I got laid off in the telecom sector. A kind of a residual dot-com bubble burst from a few years before that finally kind of popped the sector I was in. And I was faced with a choice of going back into that pool of engineering or doing something different with my life. And so I decided to see if I could be a full-time musician. Didn't wasn't making nearly as much money as I was trying to replace, but I did see an opportunity to go to college, get a PhD in music, and try to apply some of what I've learned over my life and put it back into academia. So you're looking around for a research topic when you're working on a PhD, and the research topic I picked, to nobody's delight. That's what John Swed told me. That's what George Lewis, who was my dissertation advisor, they're like, I don't know about this jazz radio thing, but I see angles in this.
Yeah.
And mostly the angles are because jazz radio as an entity isn't part of any one industry.
Right.
It's it's a bunch of things facing each other, and any time a bunch of things are facing each other, there's there's some controversy to be worked out, and there's some upper hands to be gotten, and some and the, all of the interesting detail stuff is in how those things come together. So
That's interesting.
yeah.
So take me back to your beginnings. Where were you born and raised? What were these roots of jazz that grew into you being a musician, being in radio, and loving this art form?
Yeah, I grew up in Washington D.C. Back in, as I tell people, back in the Chocolate City era, and it was a great time to grow up in music. A lot of music talent and a lot of professionalism at low levels. I played in the DC Youth Orchestra, and we traveled the world and played at a very high level. And I also went to a high school where you could major in music, and a lot of people that I went to school with are still professional musicians, and and I was fortunate to and grew up playing in funk bands, which ruled the nest in Washington D.C. in my era growing up, and I was fortunate to connect with some professional musicians. One that I really name was a man, excuse me, named Rick Henderson,
Okay.
who played with Duke Ellington in the 50s
Yeah.
when Johnny Hodges without the band. And so Rick had a big band that I got to play in alongside of grown-up musicians. And yeah, that's what really got me started in music. And then, you know, part of the problem with me being a musician was I did not have many examples of people who only played music.
Yeah.
Yeah, I only knew I was surrounded by really good musicians who all were moonlighters. They were all school teachers or postmen or things like that. And so that's why I went off and studied engineering, and I thought I'd do both. Knowing what I know now, or if I were raising a kid, I would. Yeah, there was a future for me in music, so I've accomplished a lot in music, but but not as much if I had thrown myself in it like really crazily.
Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, what was the first live jazz show you saw that blew you away?
First live jazz saw that blew me away. I don't know that I saw any. Well, I did see the oh, what's his name used to manage Ella Fitzgerald. Verve had Verve Records.
Oh, yeah. Let's see.
Yeah, he had after Verve he had a Pablo tour.
Norman Granz.
Norman Granz, and Norman Granz had this late life label Pablo, and he had Count Basie and Joe Pass and Oscar Peterson on that label. And I saw them at the Kennedy Center when I was in high school, back when the Kennedy Center was in safe hands.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm
But I
thinking,
can tell you this.
yeah.
This is one of my favorite actual gets of all time. When I was in college, I came home to DC and I saw Teddy Wilson play at Howard University.
That's
I
cool.
saw Teddy Wilson play in person.
That had to be great to see him
Yeah.
live.
Yes. Makes me sound really old, but I saw Teddy Wilson
That's
play.
cool. No, that's why I asked this question. Those are the answers that I'm looking for. So I'm thinking about though Duke Ellington was from DC, correct?
Yes.
And then was George Clinton?
1974.
Okay. Okay.
No, Marvin Gaye is from DC. And George Clinton, I think, is from Plainfield, New Jersey.
Okay. All right. I did because you had mentioned funk, and I was thinking,
Oh,
um,
DC is a funk stronghold, man.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: in the name of jazz radio, what was the radio station disc jockey? What was the one, the serum for you that hooked you into radio that made you love it?
It certainly wasn't just one, as I kind of illustrate in the 80s in the book. So if you backtrack from the 80s to the 70s, when I was of high school kind of age, Felix Grant had been in DC forever on WMAL, which is a middle of the road station, but they didn't know what Felix was doing, and he just kept doing it. He was there forever and ever. And Rusty Hassan, who is still spinning records in DC and WPFW, was on, well, they didn't have WPFW yet when I was in high school. He was on WAMU, American University station, and he was on the old station that WGTB that Georgetown had, but Georgetown, that station was driving the Jesuit overlords crazy, and they got rid of it as soon as they could. I enjoyed all of those stations, but I listened to everything on radio back then. And so I listened to classical music because I was well into it. I listened to all of the jazz on those stations. And by the way, Howard University had just gotten a station. WHUR, and and I hope I get this across in the books. When these stations first fell into black progressive programming hands, they went crazy with their own idea of how progressive revolutionary radio should go. And then somebody unfortunately pointed to the ledger books at some point, and you see how much money we could make if we just tame this. So the first years of WHUR were just incredible music. I that's where I first heard Andrew White playing. He's
Yeah.
from DC.
Yeah.
He lived 3 blocks from me, by the way, Andrew White.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So these were where it started out for me. And then, one of the apocryphal stories to me is I try to get in the book is when I worked at that Seventh Day Adventist radio station, when I get in my car at 1 a.m. after signing the station off, I could hear uh, I could hear from Clear Channel, the station in Rochester, with Harry Abraham,
Yeah.
DJ, and you could hear that station all over the East Coast through the skip on AM radio if you were lucky. And he was playing such great stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Give me a timeline here from the inception idea of writing this, which it was your dissertation, to the University of Illinois getting this, and to you actually getting a hard copy in your hands. What was that process like to get this to fruition?
Yeah, it was almost 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Uh, the dissertation idea, I probably had it around 2010. And, there are so many side things I could have done with this. But I decided to focus it on, and also, one reason I cover this much ground is it's what you do when you see that nobody has really covered it. You grab as much of it as you can. I could have went in and grabbed one slice, but might as well mark all the territory as yours. So what's in the dissertation and not in the book is network radio era stuff,
Yeah.
which I focused on Duke Ellington.
Yeah.
I published a paper on Duke Ellington and early radio, but I left that out of the book. So I wrote the dissertation, uh, pretty much covered network radio and uh, jazz on all jazz stations, and somewhat jazz on stations where it wasn't all jazz, and then the rest of it was on, why is jazz getting such a bad deal on on public radio, on non-commercial radio.
Yeah.
uh, and I was very fortunate that uh, University of Illinois Press came looking for me. They read the dissertation and said, I think you have something that you can focus and make into an interesting book." And also in the process of getting a PhD and writing this book, I lost my wife.
Oh, wow.
So I would have to honestly say there were at least 2 or 3 years where I hardly lifted a finger on this project because I was just trying to stay on the planet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and get a job and
Yeah.
and keep myself busy so I didn't have to think about how much I miss my wife, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but a real turning point was in 2019, right before the pandemic hit, when I received Hutchins Fellowship, a fellowship from Harvard University to be a fellow at the Hutchins Institute for African and African American Studies, which basically gave me an entire year in office and no responsibilities to do anything but finish this book up. So
Okay.
that was a real blessing.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, in the process of doing something like this, anytime you go on a journey to write a book, you're inevitably going to figure out things about yourself. It's almost like a mirror. What did you learn about yourself through the process of writing and celebrating jazz radio?
Well, I think I found that I really don't miss being a broadcaster very much. You would think that the pull of this would pull me back into, being on the air, but that really is not that important to me at this life, especially I've had to make room to play music. Um, uh, it has revealed how much I still enjoy listening, the exploring of jazz radio stations, which I could only dream of when I was in high school. As I said, I used to listen to this Rochester station in Washington D.C. over Skip. Well, the idea of being able to hear radio from around the country was a dream. And now with the internet, you can, right? You can listen. And here's where the dream went bad, by the way. We're all programming the same stuff now. I can listen to a public radio station in Pullman, Washington. No, that's not a bad example. I can listen to a station, but they're playing the same national programs everybody else is playing.
Yeah.
The dearth of local programming is, really very sad. Very, very sad.
I've always been independent at Neon Jazz. I've always done my own thing. I've had some affiliations here and there on
Yeah.
stations, but I've always done my own thing. And that's what I wanted to ask you about. You're
Okay.
talking about this kind of this homogenization of the process. I haven't
Yeah.
experienced that. So my question to you, with everything that I've read in the book and with what's going on, how much freedom and how much real mirror holding are they showing to the jazz world on radio today, from your estimation?
Oh wow, that's well put. Um, well, let's go back to this idea that jazz radio is not uh, it doesn't reside in one industry. It's an accommodation. The records come from the record industry,
Yep.
which has been now watered down. That's a bad term. I wish I hadn't said watered down. What I mean to say is the DIY stream has allowed a whole lot more people to participate and really diluted the power of record companies to
Yep.
dictate what you're going to get to hear. So that's a good thing, right? But that has to land on somebody, and it lands on DJs and programmers. And notice I use both terms, DJs and programmers, because some DJs are free to play what they want, and some DJs work in constrained environments by their management, right?
Yep.
And so, what you're asking me about the mirror and openness, well, it depends on, I make a strong case in the book that the bigger the station's budget, the more constrained things are.
Yeah.
The bigger the operation, the the harder it is to, I'm going to play this because I like it, and if somebody else doesn't like it, that's okay. And so all of the really exciting new music, well, I shouldn't say it that way. There's plenty of exciting music that's straight ahead and mainstream. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you can't listen to Roy Hargrove and not think that's exciting,
Right.
right? Yeah, you can't possibly, or you're in the wrong business. But I mean, these projects people like Joe Daly are doing with 800 tubas, and projects like Steve Coleman, or and I'm naming people my age. I should name some younger people. Uh, these have trouble finding place on the radio. Oliver Lake said to me, "I can't believe it. I heard one of my songs on WBGO this morning." That's terrible,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, that's terrible. Um, so all the good stuff, from my point of view, and that way of thinking, is happening on college radio and in community radio.
Yeah.
And I'm really holding the flag up for community radio in this book.
Yeah.
Community radio is an ideological idea
Yep.
that happens to have a good synchronicity with good and adventurous music. Yeah.
Yep.
Tune in to WRFG in Atlanta. You want to hear some interesting sounds.
Yeah. and that's what I was going to get into is modern people. But the one thing that struck me about your examination of jazz radio is that it mimics the world of jazz. We're talking about an art form that had a heyday, and then rock and roll came in and it put a bump in the road and it rerouted everything. And there's just always been these things where jazz radio and the jazz world has kind of been pushed off to the side. But at the end of the day, there's still evolution, there's still innovation, there's still cats that are spinning these shows, and they're going to do it on the internet. So my question to you is, do you see a parallelism with the world of the musicians and the world of the jazz DJs?
Yeah, I start the book off talking about jazz DJs, and then they kind of come back into view in the where I do kind of the case studies of different kind of stations and programming philosophies. You know, DJs, and let's just include programmers with DJs.
Yeah,
DJs and programmers who get to be DJs. Um, I should say it the other way around. DJs who get to be programmers. Um, in the original dissertation, this was okay. So the original dissertation to sound fancy had words after the colon, right? So the words after the colon were mediation, uh, mediation, something, and patronage. Well, the key was this term patronage, um, because one thing I was asking is how do people in the non-commercial sector get paid for what they do? And I would include you. How do you get paid for what you do? Because you certainly, I'm guessing, Joe, don't get paid handsomely for what you do. Or, by the way, I'm jetting off to Cancun right after this interview.
yeah,
That kind of pay, right?
yeah, yeah,
So your compensation includes uh, helping the industry that you care about, helping the sector,
yep,
promoting artists that you like,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And part of your pay is uh, prestige and respect you get from artists. He's a helpful person. He is he knows what he's talking about. Don't go on that guy's show. Go on Joe's show because Joe will treat you honestly and it's good. So there's a whole bunch of non-cash compensation that goes on in public radio.
yeah,
I'm sorry, in non-commercial radio, and it's important. This is the lubrication that gets things done. By the way, man, I want to make a plug for talk about the kind of person who makes jazz go, and jazz readers and people who just get records will never know. I'm talking about people like 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 Rio at the Jazz Gallery,
yeah,
who just for 2 decades has been making progressive music flow
yeah,
and work.
yeah,
We would be much poorer without
yeah,
her and without that place. Yeah.
yeah,
And so it was lovely to see a New York Times story that featured her.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a thing I want to bring up. Sometimes I get stuck in a vacuum between interviews and doing a weekly show, and I'll
Yeah.
catch a musician that's like, they'll thank me at the end of the interview.
Yeah.
You don't understand how important this is for getting this out and for
Yeah.
promoting the music, because if no one hears it, there's just not going to be people on the seats and live venues. It's not going to get proliferated. So my question to you, I remember Dave Liebman at one time kind of stunted me. He was saying that. I was like, I love this. It's totally fun. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. But there was a genuine timbre in his voice that was different. And it really, to this day, this was years ago, has stuck with me. He really gets it. So my question to you is, when you look at the history of jazz programmers, jazz radio programmers and DJs, do you find them to be kind of the unsung heroes of this? I mean, we couldn't do it without the music. At the end of the day, it's about the musician. But what do you see ultimately in the evolution of radio to hear from the beginnings of 2025? What do you see their role in this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I only have to temper this by saying that, radio ain't what it used to be.
Yeah,
and radio does not have the hold on the way people experience music as it used to be. Teaching in a university environment like this, I run up against kids who just don't even own radio, right?
Yeah.
And radio's last bastion is in the car. Where what else are you gonna do, right?
Yeah.
And they got ways around that too,
Yeah.
right? So radio's not what it used to be, but you look in the book. I've got this table of uh, and I've said to people half seriously that the only real contribution of this book is that table of songs named after DJs, because you won't find that anywhere else.
Yeah.
Right? I had to compile it from many sources. Well, that table of songs named after DJs or tributes to DJs tells you how important DJs were,
Yeah.
right? And programmers were.
Yeah.
And maybe some of those are, kind of you know, play my song, right? But some of that's pretty genuine.
Yeah.
Some of that is, very genuine. This guy's been a real supporter of music. And for all the flaws Symphony Sid had, Symphony Sid loved bebop, and Symphony Sid wasn't going to spend his time playing Duke Ellington records. Not that he didn't respect Duke Ellington, but I'm promoting bebop, right?
Yeah.
And the little excerpt, I was so lucky early in my research to find uh, a little site that no longer exists that was devoted to the DJ Harry Abraham, who I mentioned, and it had a letter to him to a college radio programmer, and that letter explains very much Harry Abraham's relationship with the music and how he felt compelled to promote new music by artists
Yeah.
and be part of the scene, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
the one thing that strikes me, that my philosophy on jazz radio, we get pigeonholed into that golden era of the 50s and 60s, you
yes.
know? And what I try to do is I try to
Or
intersect that.
music that sounds like it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right,
What I
right.
try to do is show what the cats are doing today and show that bridge. Because to me, jazz is a bridge. It's this world, it's that world, and there can be an infinite amount of bridges that go over the water, so to speak. And I think that, from my perspective of having the freedom to be able to pick programming, is the best way that I can highlight this, because people will want to hear the classics, Miles and all the cats. But at the same time, there's a lot of guys that are doing great stuff, guys and gals that are doing a phenomenal stuff. That, I believe, is something that people should be able to experience.
That's a unique burden on jazz radio, by the way,
Yeah,
because there's no format I can think of in the pop music, in the rock, or even black music world that is new releases and classics.
totally.
You either got an oldie station
Yeah,
or you play what's out new.
yep.
And then you play one or two oldies a month,
Uh-huh.
right? But yeah, and it's hard to fit it all in. And I talk to people like Jay Sennett down in the Hampton area, and I went out to the Jazz Week conference out in San Jose one year to talk to people out there, and the amount of product they have got to audition to squeeze into the slots that they have, keeping in mind that on a kind of a classic, forward-looking jazz radio station that is allowing the programmer to program whatever he or she wants, you're still reserving about half of it for classic stuff, right?
Yeah,
And so you've got to somehow figure out what tracks to use out of these 30 or 50 CDs you get every week. I remember when mine was in that DIY stream. And fortunately, I spent the money on a publicist, which may be the only reason anybody noticed it. But a lot of people are skipping that step because they don't have the money.
yep.
And there's a lot of good product that people, it's just so much music they have to listen to.
Absolutely. You're totally right. So, why do you love this art form we call jazz?
Oh man, because this music is so full of life. it has such a connection with life energy. It refuses to accept mediocrity. It refuses to accept uh, mechanization. You know, it refuses to accept obsolescence. It refuses to accept injustice. It refuses to accept hate. It only functions with love. I mean, this is why, man. This what is greater than this? And
Wow.
it's music from a people who did not come here willingly, yet made the most out of everything they could opportunity. And that is rubbed off on everybody that plays it, no matter what color it is.
That is the best answer I think I've ever gotten for why someone loves jazz. That is absolutely spot on and eloquently nails this community that is full of love and vigor and goodness. That's for sure. Good vigor. So let me ask you this. Are you hopeful for jazz radio? As we're into 2025, there's
No,
uncertainty in the world and all of these things. Are you hopeful?
no.
Okay.
Well, I don't know what the bottom is because we haven't reached it.
Yeah.
But every opportunity things like the internet brings uh, is also costing us in terms of diminishing our audience and everything.
Yeah.
You know, radio. I was trying to review something that I'd written, and I have a few of these interviews, and um, you know, okay, so let's look at radio. So radio was this fascinating, unbelievably exciting thing that comes on the scene in the 1920s. It's the internet of its time. You know, everybody wanted to get involved in radio, and I think this has not survived into the book. But I used to say department stores had radio stations. I'm talking about broadcasting stations.
Yeah.
Police stations had radio stations. Colleges, the ice cream shops, piano stores. Nobody wanted to miss the boat on radio. And they were right. Look at the broad mass media behemoth that radio became in the network era of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. But radio got displaced by some other technologies. And, and the people who were running radio didn't give up, and they switched the radio model to being a local based model based on records, uh, and and they thrived. They thrived for another. Well, they thrived through the 40s. They thrived through the 50s into the 60s, and then another high technology finally got used beautifully, which is FM, and radio thrived right into the 70s. If you recall, at this time in the 70s, this is when people started to figure out electronics firms started to figure out they could sell home stereo equipment of high quality to people.
Yeah.
Right before the 70s, all the hi-fi equipment was in the hands of what was the word I'm looking for? Eccentric, demented.
Yeah.
Check out my hi-fi stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But in the 70s, you know, you were not an attractive dating possibility for college students if you didn't have a nice setup
Yeah.
of your stuff, right? And so that had an impact on the way we listen. And then CDs came out, and that had an impact on the way we listen. And of course the bonehead maneuver of all time of CD was not protecting what was not protecting the content and allowing people, the smart people, to figure out how to rip it out,
Yeah.
compress it down, and distribute it freely. This is where it lines up with the internet. Sorry for this long answer,
No, you're
but
fine.
this is where it lines up with the internet in that the if you can separate the technology from the content, the technology will overrun the content like every time.
Yep.
And so uh, peer-to-peer file sharing, the internet created a space where people think They don't have to pay for anything in music. It's destroyed the newspaper business as we know of it.
Yep.
You know, there's a handful of legacy giants left, and everybody else is struggling. Uh, in fact, this destroying of the newspaper business as we know it has led to lowering standards for things that look like news and can directly be painted into the political situation we have today, where everybody has their own sources of information. Yep. And don't believe other people's sources, right? And what was happening to radio in this time? The Walkman changed the way we listen to music. Boom boxes changed the way we listen to music, but really it was the Walkman and then the iPod.
Yep.
And so we've lost this collective listening experience, which was radio. Yep. And also, I did want to get back to the geniuses that run the radio industry. The people who were smart enough to save it in the 40s and smart enough to save it from itself in the 60s and 70s, the people who created progressive radio and freeform radio and innovated it back into being relevant, they were all gone. And so the business types who took over radio, the iHearts and the when started with Reagan, but it was Bill Clinton that when they brought the Telecom Act 96. Yep. And threw all the limits off on how many stations you could get.
Yep.
It became a whole bunch of bottom line focused business operations.
Yeah.
And so all of the innovation in radio became about lowering costs.
Yeah.
Running automation, not having DJs. Can we operate 12 stations in one city with one facility? And one bank of computers with audio in it, and can one guy program 23 stations? And by the way, the ads are getting worse and worse, and nobody wants to listen to them. So radio has pooched the shoot, or whatever the guy said in The Right Stuff.
Yeah.
Radio itself has made itself unlistenable. I'm talking about commercial radio.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Public radio and non-commercial radio, that's where all the great listening was from 1980 on, on the radio dial. But they've also picked up public radio, the larger stations have also picked up a lot of professional habits from commercial radio, much to the detriment of radio. So I'm not particularly optimistic because I think if I were trying to shorten everything I said, the mass part of mass media is not coming back.
Yep, I totally agree. I don't want to run out here. I know we're running low here, so I want to make sure we've kind of scratched the surface and had a good look into your book at this point. So if anyone wants to pick up a copy or reach out, how can they do it?
Oh, well, I mean, you can buy it through the usual heated, horrible sources online. And I'm not going to tell you not to because I want you to buy it.
Yeah.
But if you're the local bookstore type, demand it from your local bookstore. You can also go online at the University of Illinois Press and find it there. You might even find a little bit of a discount there.
Okay.
And and enjoy the cover photo, which always has me feeling good.
Yeah, for sure. This has been wonderful, Aaron. Thank you so much for your time. And before we get out.
Hello, friends. Joe Domino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Domino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedomino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.